The war had been long, too long. For years the night sky above Earth burned with the light of battles fought between human fleets and the Galactic Armada, a coalition of 7 alien empires that had united for one purpose: to destroy humanity before it could grow any stronger. No one could remember how it started anymore. Some said it began over trade disputes. Others whispered it was fear. Fear of how fast humans were advancing, how they built warships out of scrap and dared to explore forbidden regions of space. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. Humanity stood alone against an enemy that controlled half the galaxy. When the Armada arrived in the solar system, the battle was already half lost. Earth's fleets were brave but broken. Most of the orbital stations had been destroyed in the first wave. The moon colonies went silent soon after. From the surface, people could see flashes in the sky, bright, silent explosions that painted the clouds in shades of red and gold. The war had come home. Inside Earth's main command bunker, deep beneath what was once the North American continent, the final council gathered. Generals, scientists, and ship captains filled the room, their faces lit by the blue glow of holographic maps. The map showed the solar system, once filled with human activity, now covered in red enemy markers. Only a few blue dots remained, representing the last of the human fleet, scattered, damaged, outnumbered 100 to 1. The commander stood at the center. His uniform was burned at the sleeve, his eyes tired but sharp. Around him, voices argued. Some demanded surrender, others screamed for one last stand. The air smelled of sweat, smoke, and desperation. "Even if we surrender," one of them said, "they'll wipe us out. They don't want peace. They want extinction." The commander didn't reply for a moment. He just stared at the flickering image of Earth on the map. The cities were burning, but billions still lived below. Billions who had nowhere else to run. Finally, he said quietly, "Then we'll make sure humanity has a tomorrow, even if we're not here to see it." Those words silenced the room. The final plan was born that night, not a plan of victory, but survival. They called it Project Exodus. While the main fleet stayed behind to defend Earth, a group of massive transport ships would slip away under stealth fields, carrying engineers, scientists, and the seeds of human civilization. They would travel beyond known space, far beyond the reach of the Armada, to rebuild. The men and women who volunteered to stay behind knew exactly what it meant. None of them expected to return, but they stood their ground, because that's what humans had always done. Every generation before them had faced extinction in one form or another, floods, plagues, wars, and survived. This time the scale was just bigger. When the Galactic Armada finally reached Earth orbit, they came in numbers beyond imagination. Thousands of warships filled the skies, each one larger than a city, covered in alien symbols that glowed like fire. Their arrival blocked out the sun. From below, the world darkened under the shadow of their fleet. The first wave hit Mars. The colonies there fought for 3 days before vanishing completely. Then they turned toward the moon bases. The humans stationed there sent one last message before the static consumed their signal. For Earth, for home. By the time the enemy reached Earth itself, only a handful of human warships remained to meet them, the last defenders of Sol. Their hulls were scarred, their ammunition almost gone, but their resolve was unbroken. Each ship carried the names of lost cities: New Delhi, Santiago, Cairo, Shanghai, London. They fought not just as soldiers, but as symbols of a dying world that refused to kneel. The final battle was short, brutal, and beautiful in its own way. It began with silence. Then the void came alive with light. Railguns fired glowing streaks across the darkness. Missile trails curved through debris fields, and the voices of pilots echoed through comms channels filled with static. Target locked, firing main battery, shields failing, rerouting power. Don't give them Sol, whatever happens, and don't let them take it. The humans fought like no one had ever seen before. They pushed their ships beyond safe limits, turned asteroids into weapons, and rammed enemy cruisers when they ran out of ammunition. Every destroyed human ship took 3 alien vessels with it. Even the enemy commanders watching from their flagships couldn't deny it. Humans were terrifying when cornered. But numbers have their price. One by one, the blue dots on the holographic map faded into red. The UNS Titan, Earth's last dreadnought, held the line for 12 hours before it was surrounded. Its captain ordered the ship's reactor to overload. taking half the enemy fleet with it in a white flash that lit the solar system like a second sun. After that, the transmissions stopped. The sky over Earth turned quiet, too quiet. In the days that followed, the Galactic Armada announced victory across the stars. News broadcasts on alien worlds celebrated the end of humanity. On distant planets, fireworks were launched to mark the occasion. The war that had cost billions of lives was finally over. The Armada entered Earth's orbit, scanning the planet below. Smoke rose from ruined cities. The oceans boiled in places where orbital strikes had hit. The invaders found no resistance, only silence. To them, it looked like total victory. Their leaders made speeches about peace and progress. They said the war had been necessary to protect the galaxy from a violent and unpredictable species. They said humanity was a mistake of evolution, a race that had dared to challenge its betters, but not everyone believed them. Among the Armada soldiers, rumors began to spread. Some swore they had seen human ships escape into deep space before the final battle. Ships with no known transponder codes, disappearing faster than sensors could track. Others claimed strange transmissions were echoing from beyond the galactic rim, messages that couldn't be traced but sounded eerily human. The higher command dismissed it all as superstition. Even if a few survived, they said, where could they possibly go? The galaxy is ours. Still, the rumors persisted. On quiet nights, Armada patrol crews sometimes found strange wrecks drifting in space. Pieces of human ships, but older, heavier, marked with strange new symbols. The officers who reported such findings were often transferred, reassigned, or simply never heard from again. Back on Earth, the planet began to heal. The invaders installed governors and rebuilt the cities in their own image. They mined the oceans, harvested the skies, and stripped away what was left of human technology. The once blue world was now just another occupied system, a reminder of what happens when a small species dares to rise too fast. And yet, beneath the ashes, something lingered. Hidden bunkers deep underground still pulsed with faint power. Buried data vaults stored maps, codes, and genetic archives. The invaders couldn't find them, because they weren't meant to. Humanity had buried its future too deep to erase. Far beyond the reach of the Armada, in the cold and empty regions beyond known space, a convoy of human ships drifted silently between the stars. These were the survivors of Project Exodus. Their engines were quiet, their hulls covered in dark plating to hide from sensors. Inside, thousands of people slept in cryogenic chambers while a handful of caretakers kept watch. They had no home, no world, and no guarantee of survival. But they had something stronger: purpose. On one of the transport ships, an engineer stood by a window staring into the endless dark. She whispered softly to herself, "If anyone can hear us, Earth still lives." The message wasn't meant for anyone specific. It was more of a prayer than a transmission. But somewhere deep in the network of alien communications, a signal flickered. A tiny pulse of human code, bouncing from relay to relay, refusing to die. It was weak, almost invisible. Yet it survived, and that was enough. Across the galaxy, years later, that same faint signal would resurface, decoded by mistake, ignored by most. But for a few, it would become a legend, a story whispered in alien bars and among soldiers who had fought the war. They said humans were gone, they would say. But what if they're just waiting? Because deep down, even the victors felt it. That cold, uneasy truth that haunted every member of the Galactic Armada. Humanity didn't surrender easily. It never had. And somewhere out there in the silent dark between the stars, the last of Earth's children were watching. Waiting, rebuilding. The galaxy might have claimed victory, but the story of humanity, that was far from over.
After the fall of Earth, the galaxy moved on. At least that's what the Galactic Armada wanted everyone to believe. They rebuilt the trade routes. They renamed the solar system Zone 47. They erased human history from their records and declared the war a victory for galactic peace. In their eyes, humanity was gone, a dangerous species that had burned itself out. But history has a strange way of refusing to die. In the quiet corners of the galaxy, small things began to happen. A cargo ship would disappear near an abandoned system. An old relay station would suddenly power on after decades of silence. And sometimes, just for a second, a transmission would break through the static. A voice, a human voice, then nothing. The Armada called it cosmic noise, but not everyone believed that. The alien empires that made up the Armada were powerful, but divided. Each species wanted to take credit for the victory over humanity. Each claimed they had led the final attack on Earth. They built statues, held parades, and argued over who destroyed more of the human fleet. But deep inside, many of them felt uneasy. Humans had fought like no other race before them. Even with their small fleets and limited technology, they had pushed the Armada to its limits. The battle for Sol had cost the Coalition millions of lives. To some, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a warning. There were stories told among the younger soldiers. They whispered that humans didn't die easily. They spoke about ships that vanished before the last battle, carrying something called Project Exodus. No one knew what it was, but every rumor shared the same ending. Humanity was still out there, somewhere waiting. The High Command laughed at such stories. They told their troops to stop dreaming of ghosts. Humans are extinct, they said. If any survived, they're lost in space. They won't last a year. And yet years passed, then decades, and still strange things kept happening. Far beyond known space, where the stars grew thin and cold, the truth was different. Humanity had not died. It had gone silent. The survivors of Project Exodus had found a home. Not a planet, but a region of space hidden inside a dense nebula that jammed sensors and blocked most signals. They called it the Veil. It was a strange, glowing cloud of gas that made navigation almost impossible. But for the refugees, it was perfect. The human convoy drifted there for years before deciding to stay. The engineers used the wrecks of old ships to build the first hidden station. It wasn't pretty. It looked more like a patchwork of metal plates and salvaged parts. But it worked. It provided air, light, and hope. They called it Haven 1. Inside, life slowly returned. The first children were born after the war, growing up without ever seeing Earth. They were taught stories of oceans, forests, and blue skies, things they had never known. The older generation tried to rebuild what they could, schools, farms, and laboratories. But what they missed most wasn't the land or the cities. It was the sound of Earth itself. The rain, the wind, the laughter of crowds. Out here in the cold emptiness, everything was quiet. Years turned into decades. The people of Haven 1 adapted. They learned to mine asteroids for minerals and grow food in artificial domes. Every piece of metal was reused. Every drop of fuel was saved. Humanity had become leaner, tougher, smarter. The survivors had scientists who refused to give up. They studied alien technology, combined it with human engineering, and began creating something new, something powerful. They didn't rebuild the same ships they had lost. They built better ones, stronger, faster. They didn't plan revenge, not yet. Their goal was survival. But in the back of everyone's mind, one truth remained. One day they would return. Not to conquer, but to remind the galaxy that humanity still existed. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Armada had grown comfortable. They ruled hundreds of worlds, confident that no one could challenge them. They no longer built new warships. They built monuments instead. On the alien capital worlds, museums displayed pieces of captured human technology, helmets, uniforms, even melted metal fragments from Earth's last dreadnoughts. Visitors would stare at them with curiosity. To them, humanity had become a story, a cautionary tale told to children. Don't be like the humans. Don't reach too far. But not everyone believed the story ended there. In quiet bars on the outer colonies, traders whispered about meeting humans. They said they had seen ships with strange designs and old Earth markings, ships that never answered hails, but watched from afar before vanishing into hyperspace. A few explorers even claimed they found ruins of hidden outposts in forgotten systems, empty bases that still ran on human-style power grids. The Armada called these rumors lies, but the stories spread anyway. And with every passing year, the legend of humanity grew. Back in the hidden nebula, life continued. Haven 1 had grown into a small civilization, a cluster of stations linked by glowing tunnels and transport pods. There were factories, schools, and even music again. One of the oldest survivors, a former commander, would often tell the younger ones, We lost our world, but not our soul. His words became a saying among the people. Whenever someone felt hopeless, others would remind them, the soul of Earth still burns. The children born in the Veil were different from their ancestors. They didn't carry the weight of loss, but they carried its memory. They trained not as soldiers, but as builders, engineers, pilots, and thinkers. They studied the mistakes of the past and promised never to repeat them. Still, in the background, the military worked quietly. Old warships were taken apart and rebuilt. The scientists experimented with new engines, new shields, new weapons. They studied captured alien data, stolen from signals drifting through space, and learned more about the Armada than the Armada ever learned about them. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. It was preparing for something greater. Then came the first contact. Small Armada scout ship accidentally entered the Veil. Its crew didn't know they had wandered into forbidden space. The nebula confused their sensors. They found nothing but silence until their radar picked up a faint echo. A shadow passed behind them. Massive, slow, and quiet. Before they could react, the lights inside their ship flickered. All systems went offline. When power returned, the shadow was gone. The scout sent one short message before vanishing completely. We found something here, something big. When the Armada searched for the ship, they found nothing. No wreckage, no signal, not even debris. It was as if the scout had been erased from existence. From that day on, no one entered the Veil again. Back on Haven 1, the event caused quiet concern. The Human Council gathered and reviewed the data. They knew the enemy had come close to finding them. It was a warning. Their years of peace might not last forever. But instead of fear, the incident brought determination. It reminded them why they had survived. The leaders met in secret chambers deep inside the station's core. Holograms of the old Earth flag glowed faintly above them. Maybe it's time, one of them said. Not for war, but to show we still exist. There was silence for a moment. Then nods around the room. The decision was made. They began to send small signals into deep space. Not enough to be traced, but enough to be noticed. Simple coded pulses that repeated every few months. To most, they sounded like background noise. But to anyone who understood old human frequencies, they carried a message. We endure. It was the first time in half a century that humanity had spoken to the galaxy again. Quietly, patiently, confidently. The years rolled on. The galaxy changed. New empires rose and fell, and the memory of Earth became a myth. But the Veil remained untouched. Inside, humans had built fleets. Not of hundreds of ships, but a few mighty ones, each forged with care and precision. They were not ready yet. But when they were, the galaxy would know. The old commander, now frail but still sharp, stood on the viewing deck one last time. Through the window, he could see the glow of distant stars and the shapes of half-built dreadnoughts drifting in dry dock. He smiled faintly and whispered, "They think we're gone. Let them think so. We'll come back when it matters." And so the years of silence continued, not as years of defeat, but as years of becoming. Humanity had vanished from the galaxy's maps, but not from its story. The silence was not the end. It was the pause before the return, because somewhere, beyond the nebula, deep in the heart of the Veil, the engines of the future were already humming, quiet, steady, waiting for the right moment to roar. And when they did, the stars themselves would remember the sound of Earth. Time passed. 100 years after the fall of Earth, the galaxy had changed completely. The Galactic Armada, once a temporary alliance of 7 species, had grown into the single most powerful force in the known universe. They called themselves the Guardians of Order. Their ships patrolled every major trade route. Their laws shaped every colony. And their story, the story of how they destroyed humanity, became the foundation of their empire. Every school across the galaxy taught the same version of history. Once, there was a violent species from the blue planet called Earth. They spread too fast, fought too fiercely, and refused peace. To protect the galaxy, they were removed. It was simple, clean, and convenient. The perfect story for those in power. The Armada's leaders lived in shining cities on their capital world, floating high above the surface in golden towers. They held endless ceremonies celebrating the victory of soul. Statues of alien heroes lined the streets, commanders who had supposedly led the final assault on Earth. The people bowed to them, sang songs about unity, and repeated the same words again and again. The galaxy is safe. Humanity is gone. But even as they celebrated, cracks were forming. The Armada's government had grown slow, lazy, and proud. The admirals who once fought wars now attended parties and gave speeches. They commanded from behind luxury and comfort, far away from the cold void where real soldiers once stood. Some veterans still remembered the war. They had seen the fire over Mars, the burning of the moon, and the courage of human fleets that refused to surrender. When they looked up at the skies now, they didn't feel pride. They felt unease. One old officer once whispered to his apprentice, "If they ever come back, we won't be ready." But no one listened. The younger generation of leaders laughed at the idea. "Come back," they said. "From where?" "The humans are dust." The Armada's control stretched across thousands of star systems. They built new fleets. Sleek and beautiful ships meant more for show than battle. Each flagship had a name that echoed arrogance: Eternal Dominion, Invincible Light, Shield of the Stars. But behind the shining hulls, the engines were weak. The weapons outdated. The admirals believed no one would ever challenge them again, so they stopped improving. Why build better ships when there were no enemies left? Meanwhile, they used their fleets not for defense, but for display. Every year, the Armada held a massive parade in the center of the galaxy, a peace march where warships drifted past in perfect formation while crowds cheered from orbital stations. The leaders would give speeches about how the galaxy had entered a golden age of peace. The irony was that peace didn't come from wisdom. It came from fear. Every species remembered what happened to humans. No one dared rise against the Armada. Even minor disagreements were silenced before they could grow. But deep beneath the surface, resentment simmered. Many smaller races felt trapped under the Armada's rule. They didn't dare speak out loud, but in private some said quietly, "At least the humans fought for freedom." Those words were dangerous, enough to make someone disappear. Still, they spread like whispers in the dark. As the Armada's pride grew, so did their blindness. Strange things were happening along the far borders of known space. Ships disappeared. Mining colonies went silent. Patrols reported flickers of unknown energy readings in deep space, signals that didn't match any known technology. At first, the High Command ignored it. Malfunctions, they said. Pirates. Space storms. But over time, the reports became more frequent. A merchant convoy vanished near the Andromas Reach, a strategic trade corridor connecting several major worlds. The escort ships reported seeing massive shadows before losing contact. When reinforcements arrived, they found nothing. No wreckage, no survivors, only empty space. The Armada's investigators concluded it was a hyperspace accident. Ships sometimes vanish in the void, they said. It happens, but not everyone believed that. Some of the lower-ranking officers began comparing the incident reports. There was a pattern. The disappearances always happened near the same coordinates, and always left behind traces of human-style transmission codes. That terrified them. They took the data to their superiors. The admirals laughed in their faces. "Human transmission codes," they said. "You've been reading too many ghost stories." So the reports were buried, sealed under classified archives, and forgotten by those who wanted to keep their peace of mind. Inside the Armada, the propaganda machine worked harder than ever. New films and books glorified the war against Earth. They turned the invasion into a legend of heroism, portraying the humans as cruel monsters who had to be destroyed for the good of all life. They showed hollow-eyed soldiers, fake interviews, and dramatized battles. The people believed it. Why wouldn't they? They had never seen the real war. To them, humans were just myths, creatures of chaos from a forgotten age. But for the older generation, those who had seen Earth's blue oceans and the faces of human captives, the lies burned like acid. Some still carried guilt. Others carried fear. They remembered how humanity had refused to kneel even when their world was burning. They remembered the human fleets that fought with no backup, no hope, yet still inflicted impossible damage. They remembered the look in human eyes, defiance. Pure and unbroken, it haunted them. The Galactic Armada, blind in its pride, continued its expansion. New planets were colonized, new laws were written, and the Admiralty Council declared itself the eternal ruler of the stars. They had become exactly what they once claimed to destroy, an empire built on domination. To show their power, they built a new superweapon, the Solar Crown. It was a colossal orbital ring, able to focus a planet's energy into a weapon beam that could vaporize entire moons. The construction took years and billions of lives, but when it was finished, the Armada's leaders declared it the symbol of peace through power. They didn't realize they had just painted the biggest target in the galaxy. Far away, in the hidden region humans called the Veil, the old sensors picked up the announcement. The Human Council watched the broadcast in silence. The alien leader smiled proudly from a hologram, declaring, "No force will ever challenge us again." For a long moment, no one in the human chamber spoke. Then one of the engineers whispered, "They really believe they've won." Another replied softly, "Good. Let them keep believing it." In the galaxy's outer sectors, discontent grew. Entire colonies were taxed into poverty. The Armada's soldiers treated smaller races like servants. And yet, even as rebellion brewed in whispers, the admirals ignored it. They were too busy celebrating their own greatness. When reports of missing ships reached the capital again, they dismissed them once more. "It's the pirates," they said. "We'll deal with it later." But among the lower fleets, something unusual began to spread. Recordings captured by deep space probes. They showed faint glimpses of unknown vessels moving between the stars. The recordings were blurry, but one detail was clear. The ships had no alien markings. Their hulls were dark, cold, and angular, shaped like nothing the Armada had ever built. And on their sides, faintly illuminated by engine light, was something ancient. White letters written in the human language of old Earth. The recordings were immediately confiscated by the Armada's intelligence department. Those who had seen them were told to forget. Some were reassigned to distant posts. But one thing was certain. Those who saw the footage never forgot what they saw. Because in those brief seconds, they realized something horrifying. The humans were not gone, they had evolved. Still, the Armada carried on, unaware of how close the storm had come. Their fleets grew lazier, their captains more arrogant, their empire more fragile. They had the galaxy's biggest ships but the smallest courage. They had weapons but no will. Meanwhile, somewhere beyond their borders, unseen by any of their sensors, a fleet was awakening. Engines that hadn't burned for generations came to life again. Massive warships, human-built and battle-scarred, powered up one by one. Their hulls glowed with old Earth markings, but their systems pulsed with technology far beyond anything the Armada possessed. The silence that had lasted for a century was ending. The galaxy had celebrated for 100 years. Believing the humans were extinct, they had built statues, songs, and lies around their triumph. But triumph built on arrogance never lasts. And as the stars watched quietly, far from the Armada's golden towers, a simple message was sent into the void, calm, measured, and unmistakably human. For those who remember Earth, stand by, we are coming home. The galaxy had fallen into routine. The Galactic Armada's fleets patrolled space like clockwork, their ships gleaming under the light of distant suns. To most citizens, life felt peaceful. The war with humanity was a story from another time and a tale told by elders to remind the young how fragile peace could be. 100 years of silence had convinced almost everyone that the humans were truly gone. Then one ordinary day, the silence broke. It began as a faint disturbance in the outer communications grid, a strange pulse repeating every few seconds. The Armada's technicians dismissed it at first. There were always random signals out there, dying stars, old satellites, space debris bouncing back radio waves. But this one was different. It didn't fade. It didn't drift. It repeated. Exactly every 6 seconds. And it carried structure, rhythm, spacing, and a strange pattern that no one could explain. A junior officer at a monitoring station tried running it through translation software. The computer returned only one phrase: signal identified, human origin. For a moment, the entire room went silent. The officer stared at the screen, unsure whether to believe it. He ran the check again. The same result appeared. Human origin. He hesitated, then called his supervisor. The message was forwarded up the chain of command, traveling through hundreds of channels until it reached the Admiralty Council itself. Within hours, every major fleet command in the galaxy knew about it. The signal coming from beyond mapped space, repeating in perfect intervals. At first, the High Council laughed. A relic transmission, they said. Probably a recording bouncing off some old debris. Humans are gone. Don't waste resources, but the signal didn't stop. Every hour it grew stronger. It wasn't random static anymore. It was words, faint, ancient, but unmistakably human. This is Fleet Command. Terra endures. The words spread like wildfire. Across hundreds of worlds, rumors began to grow. Some called it a hoax. Others said it was a ghost broadcast from the war. But deep down, people felt something they hadn't felt in generations. Unease. The Armada scrambled to control the story. Official news channels announced that the signal was false information generated by pirate networks. They tried to erase it from public access, but it was too late. The signal had already been copied, replayed, and whispered across every corner of the galaxy. Even on distant mining colonies, workers huddled around receivers, listening to the faint, steady message. This is Fleet Command. Terra endures. For the first time in a century, the word Terra, the ancient name for Earth, was spoken again, and it spread faster than the Armada could silence it. In the capital city of the Armada, panic began behind closed doors. Meetings were held in secret chambers. Generals argued. Scientists tried to explain the impossible. The admirals demanded answers. How could a human signal still exist after so long? One of the senior analysts finally stood and said quietly, "Because maybe." They never died. The room fell silent. No one wanted to believe it. But the evidence was growing. Long-range probes that tried to trace the signal kept disappearing. Navigation drones sent toward its source failed to return. The few that did came back with corrupted data. Images of black space, strange metallic shadows, and light patterns no one could identify. Something was moving out there. The Armada doubled its patrols. Fleets were redeployed to border sectors. The propaganda networks went into overdrive, repeating the same message across every world. Do not believe false human transmissions. The galaxy is safe, but even the most loyal citizens could sense fear behind the calm voices of their leaders. Far away, the hidden nebula humans called the Veil, the truth was unfolding. The human fleet, silent for a century, had awakened. Massive ships drifted slowly out of their dry docks, their engines glowing for the first time in generations. Each vessel bore markings from the old Earth fleets, but they looked nothing like the ships that had once fallen in Sul. These were something new, larger, darker, more powerful, built not just for survival, but for purpose. Inside the command decks, voices echoed over intercoms as engineers checked systems. The hum of power filled the corridors. Lights flickered on across the hulls, one after another, until the black ships looked like floating cities. The humans had not been idle. They had used their century of silence to rebuild everything. Technology, strategy, and unity. The Dreadnoughts were the result. Giants of steel and willpower, equipped with weapons that even the Armada couldn't imagine. At the heart of the fleet, an old voice spoke into the communicator. "All systems green. Bring us online. It's time." And then the humans sent their first real transmission to the galaxy. Not a whisper, but a roar. "To the Galactic Armada. This is Earth Fleet Command. You declared our extinction. You were wrong. Terra endures." Across the galaxy, communication networks collapsed in seconds. The human fleet signal swept through every relay, overloading systems and shutting down networks that had been stable for decades. Entire planets lost connection for hours. Navigation satellites went offline. Even the Armada's top military channels were jammed. They tried to fight the signal, but it wasn't a weapon. It was code. It seeped through systems like a living thing, rewriting data, hijacking communication grids, and replacing them with one simple message: we are still here. For the first time in its history, the Galactic Armada lost control of its own sky. On one outer world patrol, a small group of ships detected strange readings. Their sensors picked up movement, dozens of unidentified vessels emerging from deep space. At first, they thought it was a storm of debris. Then their visuals came online. Black silhouettes filled the view, massive ships silent and precise moving in formation. Their hulls absorbed light, giving them an almost ghost-like presence. The Armada's patrol commander ordered identification scans. The computer replied in a flat tone. Unknown class, unknown origin, signature human design. The commander froze. Before he could react, one of the unknown ships transmitted a single message across open channels. The voice was calm, steady, and unmistakably human. Stand down. We have no quarrel with you, but this space no longer belongs to tyrants. And then the transmission cut. The human ships didn't fire. They simply drifted past, silent and unstoppable, disappearing into the dark. The patrol ships tried to follow, but their sensors failed. When they finally reconnected with the fleet, their logs had been erased. The only thing left was that single voice recording. The Armada's leaders panicked again. But this time there was no denying it. Humanity had returned. The news broke across the galaxy like thunder. On every world, citizens whispered, "The humans are back." Old veterans who had fought in the war sat in silence, remembering what those words meant. Traders who had dismissed the legends began changing routes, avoiding certain regions of space. And on smaller planets under Armada control, people who had long hated their rulers quietly cheered. Because if humanity had survived, then maybe the empire that ruled them wasn't invincible after all. The Admiralty Council met in emergency session. Their faces were pale. Their voices trembled behind polished confidence. "We must respond," one of them said. "We can't let them spread fear." Another snapped, "Fear? They're ghosts. We destroyed them." But no one truly believed that anymore. Every ship that had gone to investigate had vanished. Every attempt to trace the signal ended in silence. At last, the Grand Admiral stood. His voice was cold but steady. "We will not be mocked by the past," he said. "If the humans are out there, we will find them and end this once and for all." He ordered the deployment of the largest fleet in history. Thousands of ships from every corner of the Armada, converging on the region where the signal had originated. The galaxy watched as the mighty Armada gathered once again, preparing for war, confident that their power would crush any ghost of the past. But out in the dark, beyond the edge of known space, the human fleet was waiting, calm, patient. Ready? Inside the command center of the lead Dreadnought, officers watched the Armada's movements on holographic displays. One of them smiled faintly. "They're coming," he said quietly. Another replied, "Let them. It's time they remembered who we are," and so the silence of a century gave way to the beating heart of destiny. For the first time in living memory, the galaxy stood on the edge of something it had forgotten. Fear, yes, but also awe. Because the humans had not returned to conquer, they had returned to remind the stars that even in the darkest corners of the universe, light could survive. The signal that had started it all kept echoing across space, stronger than ever now, clear and unbroken. "This is Fleet Command. Terra endures, and this time everyone was listening." The stars above Andromas Reach burned bright that day, brighter than ever before. It was a calm stretch of space, silent for centuries, surrounded by rings of dust and drifting asteroids. The Galactic Armada chose it as the place to prove their power once again. They believed it would be their final victory, the end of the human rumor that had spread fear across the galaxy. Hundreds of thousands of warships gathered there. Massive carriers, destroyers, and frigates floated in tight formation. Their engines glowed blue and gold, turning the void into a field of light. Admirals across dozens of command decks stood ready, proud and confident. They had faced rebellions before. They had crushed uprisings and pirates. To them, this was just another campaign, a show of strength, but they had no idea what was waiting for them beyond the dark edge of the Reach. In the far distance, hidden behind a veil of sensor jammers, the human fleet watched in silence. Dozens of dreadnoughts, black, massive, and completely still, floated like shadows among the stars. Their hulls had no markings, no flags. Only the faint outline of Earth's emblem glowed softly on their sides. Inside each ship, the crew waited at their posts. Some were veterans, old enough to remember the fall of Sol. Others were born in exile, raised under the cold light of distant suns. But all of them shared one thing: purpose. They were not fighting for revenge. They were fighting to remind the galaxy who they were. In the command center of the lead Dreadnought, the lights dimmed as final preparations were completed. Reports flowed across the main screen. All systems green, weapons charged, engines ready. Calm voice spoke over the intercom. The Armada is in position. Their formation is tight. They're expecting a frontal assault. Another voice answered softly. Then they're about to learn how wrong they are. For years, the Galactic Armada had ruled by sheer numbers. They believed power meant more ships, more guns, more control. But humanity had learned something deeper, that strategy and unity were stronger than size. When the countdown reached 0, the human fleet moved. No warning, no announcement, just a sudden shift in space. Dozens of black dreadnoughts emerged from their hidden positions, their drives igniting in perfect synchronization. For a brief moment, the stars seemed to bend as the fleet appeared right behind the Armada's main line. The enemy didn't even realize what had happened until the first energy pulse hit. The lead dreadnought fired a beam of pure light that sliced through the darkness. It struck the largest Armada carrier, the ship that held the high command, and tore it in half. No explosion, no fireball, just silent destruction as the carrier broke apart, its fragments drifting into the void. Across the fleet, alarms screamed. Commanders shouted orders. Ships scrambled to form new lines, but confusion spread faster than discipline. They had never seen a fleet move like this. The human dreadnoughts didn't rush forward. They moved. In patterns, coordinated, deliberate, every maneuver precise and deadly. Each time the Armada regrouped, they found the humans already waiting in the perfect position. Inside one of the human dreadnoughts, the crew watched the battle unfold through massive display screens. Lines of light crossed the void, tracing the movements of ships and weapons. Every shot was calculated, every loss minimized. Target lock confirmed, a young officer reported. Fire when ready, came the quiet reply. Another bright pulse leapt from the ship's cannon, cutting through the darkness and striking a cruiser squarely in its engine core. The cruiser folded in on itself, vanishing in silence. To the human crew there was no cheer, no celebration, only focus. Every person knew what this fight meant, not destruction, but proof. Proof that humanity had survived, evolved, and returned stronger. Across the human fleet, hundreds of similar scenes played out. Calm voices, focused faces, a rhythm that felt almost like music, the beat of unity in motion. Meanwhile, inside the Armada's flagship, one of the few that remained intact, chaos reigned. Officers shouted over one another, trying to understand how their sensors had failed, how their formations were collapsing. "Where are they coming from?" one demanded. "How are they moving this fast?" No one had answers. Their communications were jammed. Their navigation systems flickered with strange interference. Every attempt to target the dreadnoughts failed as the human ships faded in and out of detection, like ghosts made of metal and fire. The Armada had relied too long on technology it barely understood, technology once stolen from humanity's ruins. And now, that same technology was being used against them, mastered by the people who had built it first. As the hours passed, the scale of the battle became clear. Entire wings of Armada ships vanished from scanners. Some surrendered, some fled. Others simply stopped transmitting. Still, the humans didn't press for total destruction. They focused only on disabling weapons, removing threats, and forcing retreats. The dreadnoughts moved with purpose, striking hard, and then vanishing again. The Grand Admiral of the Armada finally gave the order no one expected. "Retreat! All forces, retreat to the outer rim." It was a moment no one had ever imagined hearing. The proud Armada, unbeaten for generations, was running. But even as the retreat began, the human fleet didn't chase them. The dreadnoughts stopped, holding their position in the silence of space. They had made their point. From the shattered wrecks and drifting debris, escape pods began to signal distress. The human fleet's rescue ships moved immediately, collecting survivors, even from the Armada's side. Those rescued stared in disbelief when they saw who was saving them. They expected cruelty. Instead, they found calm professionalism. The humans treated the wounded, offered water, and even shared food. One Armada officer whispered, still in shock, "Why help us? We destroyed your world." A human medic looked at him and replied softly, "Because we remember what it means to be human, even when you don't." That moment spread across the surviving crews like wildfire. It became the first story told after the battle, not about the victory, but about mercy. By the time the smoke of battle cleared, the galaxy had changed forever. The Armada's proud fleets were scattered. Their command was broken. The few ships that returned to their home worlds carried stories that would shake every system. Stories of ships that appeared from the dark and fought like living legends. Across the galaxy, old fears turned into wonder. People who had once cheered for the Armada's dominance began to whisper about the humans with respect. They spoke of how humanity had returned not as conquerors, but as something greater. Guardians who fought only when forced, who destroyed only what threatened life itself. Back aboard the human flagship, silence filled the command center as the last signals faded from the screens. Reports came in, minimal losses, high success, mission complete. The commander looked at the stars ahead, then at the Earth symbol glowing softly on the main display. "It's done," he said quietly. "The galaxy knows." Someone nearby asked, "What happens now?" He smiled faintly. "Now we rebuild. Not just us. Everyone." Word of the battle spread faster than light. Within weeks, dozens of planets once under Armada rule rose up peacefully, demanding freedom. Many of the Armada's own officers refused new orders, saying they would no longer fight for pride or control. In the following months, the human fleet moved quietly across the stars, not as invaders, but as helpers. They repaired damaged stations, restored communication networks, and sent supplies to border worlds left in chaos. Wherever they went, they left the same message. "We are not here to rule. We are here to remind you what it means to stand together." For the first time in generations, the galaxy saw something it had forgotten: hope. And in the heart of deep space, where the wreckage of the battle still drifted among the stars, the human dreadnoughts glowed like beacons of light. Their engines hummed softly, ready to move again whenever they were needed. The war that had begun with fear ended with understanding. The Armada, once so proud, had been humbled not by destruction, but by humanity's courage and restraint. As the human fleet turned away from Andromas Reach, a quiet transmission went out across every known frequency. A simple, steady voice that echoed through the void. "This is Fleet Command. The battle is over. We remember those who fell, on all sides. May peace return to the stars. Terra endures." The message reached every world. Some listened in silence, others wept. For the first time in a century, people looked at the sky not with fear, but with belief, because somewhere out there, humanity was watching, not as conquerors, but as guardians of the light they had carried through the darkest of times. And in that vast, endless sky, the stars seemed to shine just a little brighter, as if the universe itself had remembered what hope looked like. The war was over, but the silence that followed felt even louder than the battle. Across the stars, the wreckage of the great fight at Andromas Reach floated quietly. Pieces of metal, fragments of dreams, and echoes of a history that would never be forgotten. The Galactic Armada's once mighty fleets had scattered into the void. Some of their ships still drifted without power, their crews waiting for rescue. Others had escaped, lost in shame and disbelief. And far away, at the heart of it all, the human dreadnoughts stood still, surrounded by the quiet glow of distant suns. For the first time in more than a century, humanity had no enemy before it. Only the vast, endless galaxy, wounded, uncertain, and waiting for something new. In the command deck of the lead dreadnought, the lights were dim. The crew watched. Reports flow across the screens. Damaged colonies, broken communication networks, entire worlds left without guidance after the fall of the Armada. But there was no celebration, no cheers, just a quiet understanding that the real work had only begun. A calm voice spoke through the bridge. The galaxy needs rebuilding. It's time to move from war to healing. The fleet commanders nodded. The dreadnoughts that had brought destruction would now bring hope. Their weapons stayed silent. Their hangars opened for supplies, and their great engines began to hum once more. Not toward battle, but toward life. Weeks turned into months as the human fleet spread across the stars. Wherever they went, they helped rebuild what had been broken. They repaired communication grids on planets that had gone dark for decades. They restored clean water systems to colonies that had been ignored by the Armada. They offered food, medicine, and power, freely, without demand or rule. At first, the other species didn't believe it. They watched with fear, thinking humanity would conquer them next. But the humans never took control. They stayed only long enough to help, then moved on, leaving behind peace instead of chains. On one barren world, children who had grown up under Armada rule stared in wonder as a human dreadnought hovered above their skies, casting a gentle light. Soldiers came down not with weapons, but with tools and aid. They built homes, planted crops, and shared stories about Earth, the lost world that had once been called home. For many, it was the first time they had seen soldiers bring hope instead of fear. News of humanity's kindness spread faster than any fleet. Across the galaxy, old enemies began to speak again. Trade routes reopened. Leaders who once feared each other started to meet under the watch of the human fleet, guided by a new understanding that no species was meant to rule alone. The Armada's survivors were the hardest to reach. Many had lived their whole lives believing they were superior, chosen to lead. Now they were broken, their pride shattered. But humanity didn't seek revenge. They sent envoys, doctors, and engineers to help even the worlds that had once attacked Earth. When one of the former Armada captains asked why they were being shown mercy, a human replied simply, "Because mercy is the one victory no weapon can win." That answer spread across the surviving Armada worlds like light through darkness. For the first time, they began to understand what humanity truly stood for. Soon, something remarkable began to happen. Planets once divided by hate started to work together. Human engineers trained alien scientists. Former Armada officers volunteered to help restore colonies. Even species that had never spoken before began to share resources, inspired by what they had witnessed at Andromas Reach. Out of the ashes of war, something new was forming. A network of unity, a council of free worlds that believed in cooperation instead of control. And at the center of it all stood humanity, not as rulers but as guides. Everywhere they went, people spoke the same words. Terra endures. It became a symbol, not just of Earth but of strength, survival, and kindness. Songs were written about the dreadnoughts, not as machines of war, but as guardians that had crossed the stars to defend peace. Artists painted them against the backdrop of galaxies, their black hulls reflecting the light of distant suns. And among the humans themselves, something changed too. For the first time in centuries, they began to dream of returning home, to the blue planet they had lost. But Earth was gone, its surface burned and empty, yet even in ruin, it remained sacred. A small fleet was sent back, carrying scientists and builders. They began restoring the soil, planting green again where ashes once lay. They didn't call it rebuilding Earth. They called it starting again. One quiet evening, far from any war zone, a human officer stood on the bridge of a dreadnought, watching a young alien child laugh as food was delivered to a village below. The officer smiled faintly and said, "This is what we fought for. Not victory, not power, just life." And that became the spirit of the new age, life shared and protected. Years passed. The galaxy slowly healed. The scars of war faded into history. The once feared Galactic Armada became a distant memory, a reminder of what happens when pride replaces compassion. The new alliance of worlds grew stronger. They built cities that mixed technology and nature, floating gardens that orbited suns, and great learning centers where knowledge from every species was shared freely. And every year, on the day the battle of Andromas Reach had ended, people across the stars gathered for a single moment of silence. It was called the Day of Endurance. They didn't celebrate war, they remembered unity. In time, the Dreadnoughts themselves were no longer needed for battle. Many were turned into peace stations, great orbital sanctuaries where travelers could rest and learn about the history of the galaxy. Their massive cannons were dismantled, replaced with observatories and hospitals. One of the oldest ships, the Resolute, was transformed into a floating museum. Visitors from hundreds of worlds came to walk its corridors and listen to recordings. From the old days, the voices of those who had fought, dreamed, and hoped. In one section of the ship, a single message played on loop, the signal that had started it all. This is Fleet Command. Terra endures. Every time someone heard it, they felt something stir, a reminder that even when everything seems lost, life can find a way back. As the decades rolled on, humanity's role became that of teachers and peacemakers. They helped new civilizations grow, explored the unknown, and shared their hard-earned wisdom. When asked how they had survived such dark times, they always gave the same answer: because we never forgot what it means to be human. And that message spread beyond species, beyond borders. Being human came to mean something more. It meant courage, compassion, and the will to keep going even when hope seems gone. Far away, on the rebuilt surface of Earth, the first new dawn in centuries broke over green hills and blue oceans. The sky was clear, the air clean again. Children ran along beaches that had once been dust and stone. Above them, in orbit, a single dreadnought watched silently, the last one still active, kept not for war, but for memory. A quiet transmission came from its bridge. Mission complete. Humanity has returned home. The voice paused, then added softly, "May we never forget what it cost and what it taught us." From that day on, Earth was no longer a symbol of loss. It became a beacon of renewal, proof that no matter how far one falls, one can rise again. And somewhere deep in space, where stars whispered across the void, the story of humanity's return continued to inspire countless worlds. They would tell it to their children, who would tell it to theirs. The story of a species that refused to die, that turned its pain into purpose and its war into wisdom. The galaxy would never forget the message that echoed through the stars, the message that changed everything. We are not here to rule. We are here to remind you, never underestimate those who learn to survive on the only planet that tried to kill them every day. Terra endures. And with those words, the legend of humanity became more than history. It became hope itself, a light that would shine forever across the stars.